Welcome back to another Reading and Correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 28 of The Technician's Fight. Jeremy hurried back to engineering to find it had been less to find it as it had been these last weeks, busier than ever. Every station occupied, technicians from engineering, maintenance, repairs, and probably other departments he hadn't had to deal with coming and going. They were on their way to another rendezvous Niall's relative had arranged, and after witnessing the Earthers' willingness to blow themselves up, the engineer wasn't willing to give any god an opportunity to meddle against the Bane. He was going to ensure every component on the ship was flawless. Technically, he didn't have that kind of authority. But since the reactor's power was from engineering and it gave him a say in anything that used that power. Little in a ship like the Bane didn't rely in part on the engineer's reactor. Even civilians who had their own power reactor under the supervision of maintenance also drew from his reactor when they weren't under combat situation. It had meant rerouting everything to one of the boards, which meant redesigning some. None of them had been built with monitoring weapons in mind. They'd had to work with the hunters in charge of them to make sure every reading was accurate. The engineer had also extended the shifts to 14 hours and hired qualified civilians to help. Jeremy didn't think he'd need the captain's permission for it, but he was confident the night Alex had spent in their bed at the start of the work had been to bribe the captain into agreeing. If he'd realized what it would mean for his workday, Jeremy wasn't sure he would have agreed to that very fun night. Technician Jeremy Bradshaw, the engineer called, looking up from the open panel of his reactor. Go with Hunter Carmichael Drogretrin Flockneer. She'll take you to the guns that aren't reading correctly. Fix them. He located the female in question, more by her looking out of her depth than her hunter uniform. It wasn't an expression he saw often on a hunter. He exchanged his bag for one with a full set of circuits and other most common components that were now being kept by the entries. He didn't know if any of that would work with the weapon system, but he'd deal with that once he knew what needed fixed. Hunter, he greeted her. Technician. She continued to look at the technicians coming and going, working the station. If you'll lead the way. Of course, sorry. He no longer had to force himself not to run, even without considering he could do so much longer than any of them at most Kelsirian's hurried places. They weren't designed to run from one side of the ship to the other, and to accommodate that, they had different levels of urgency. Engineering hardly ever had anything that even required hurrying. When speed was really a factor, someone with the authority to override a lift would be assigned, and they'd take that where they needed to go. The trek to the weapon in question was leisurely. Then he set to work, needing the specialist assistance to remove the covers so he could access the insides. He'd never seen ships gone before, and even now, he was taken aback by how large they were. Its inside wasn't as luxurious as the inside of the reactor or even the crawlways, but even at a glance, he found dozens of areas where it could be compacted to reduce its size. 2 hours later, nothing within the guns returned as having trouble, so the specialist's clear pride, so he followed the conduits under the floor and into the wall until he found a junction with a marked power loss. It wasn't one he'd come across in his work before, but while Kelsirians were more artisanal in their technology than industrial, everything was on file, so new ones could be printed as required. That, as far as Jeremy was concerned, should have led to them mass producing everything, the way Earthers did. There is living in making, Graal had told him one evening when he'd grown frustrated with all the different circuits. Jeremy knew that. He had files upon files on his drafting table of him just making stuff. But once the best version was made, everyone should be using that. Growlithe smiled, kissed him, and led him to bed to help him work off his frustration there. It still irked him, but he accepted it as cultural differences and as cultural differences. That's going to be plural, and moved on. The section had a dedicated printer, so he set that to make the needed part and returned to testing the rest. 3 hours later, he'd replaced 3 more components because, while they weren't coming up as faulty, he didn't like the variance in the result. He sent the last of the replacement report to the engineer, then put the tools away and added this one to the pack he'd printed to bring them back. Figured the engineer would want to go over them to see if they'd fail, or if not, Jeremy wanted to study them. He figured that just with the reactor's design, he could learn something from how these components. What? He figured that just like with the reactor's design, he could learn. Helps if I type properly. He could learn something from how these components worked. As soon as he set foot in engineering, he was sent to check more systems, plural. One of the sensor array this time. He changed packs and headed where he was instructed. He had no idea how he made it home. One of the Kelsirian's god had to have meddled for him to not to end up in someone else's home. As tired as he was, tired enough to think of gods as real and able to affect his life, he collided with a wall of fur on his way to the bed and arms wrapped around him. I need you to arrest the engineer for slavery. He mumbled in the fur. He shouldn't be allowed to overwork me like that. I'm his friend. He'll pass, Graal said gently. I don't want him to stop being my friend. I'm scared of what he'll do to me, what he'll have me do if he doesn't like me. The chest shook with the chuckle. The work will pass. He won't stop being your friend. Jeremy nodded. That made more sense. I brought food. I'm sorry I haven't cooked. More chuckling. We're busy making sure the ship's the best it can be. I can take eatery food while that happens. Okay. Graal led him to the table with a large selection of meat and sauce, where a large selection of meat and sauces waited. Some of his exhaustion vanished as he ate, but he didn't protest when his heart guided him to the shower afterward, then bed. Technician, a male said, the engineer sent me to give you this and assist in any way you need. Jeremy caught himself looking the male over and didn't know if it was the lack of self-restraint. Didn't know if the lack of self-restraint was due to exhaustion buildup over weeks or continued long shift, or that he wasn't tired enough to consider a distraction a valid definition of however he needed. Maybe once this work was done. He looked over the information on the tablet. You can address me as Technician Jeremy Bradshaw. I know. The male's ears folded back. Everyone knows. He waited. Jeremy waited some more. This would be where you tell me how to address you? How I'm to address you? Right. Sorry. I'm Harkavak Sal Tokar Viloas. the ears still weren't coming up. Had the engineer, his friend, sent this mail to help or to help? He certainly seemed more uncomfortable than someone here just for work. Should I look up the closest leisure alley? Maybe getting this out of the way now would be best. No! I wouldn't think of it. He hung his head. I'm so not making a good impression, am I? Jeremy pulled the mail into a hug. It's fine. You're allowed. You certainly aren't the only one on the ship. But I wanted to impress you with how professional I am. He chuckled. There's still time for that. We haven't started working, and we'll be going over another section of the life support system, so we're going to need a shower after that. It'll be an opportunity to get to know each other some more. I just want to bed, Jimmy complained as Gral guided him along the causeway. This is better. Jimmy tried to glare at his clearly wrong heart, but his eyes wouldn't obey. He couldn't get them past droopy. Something better than a bed with you in it. Are you finally taking us to Xeniaz's home? No. Then I don't see how this can be. They entered a quiet shop. Smell of gentle, oily fragrance embraced him. Welcome. A familiar female voice greeted them, and he forced his eyes to focus. Neil Lacassar smiled at them. Okay, Jeremy admitted. This is better than even you in my bed right now. She tilted an ear. I'm honored. And he's in need of a massage, as I am. If you have someone available, I should have reserved, but I didn't think this was what we'd do until he got home. We're rarely so busy we can't accommodate on-the-spot decisions, Captain. She motioned to another female. Milikti Sartnoko Rometir will see to you while I see to your heart. This one. This is capitalized. And 2, that's a T. Jeremy nuzzled Gral before letting him go. Thank you. You're welcome. And that concludes chapter 28 of The Technician's Fight. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available on Ream Story. And if you are looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.